gardening gets a lot of attention, and that's for good reason. In this video, I'm going to share my take and some of the real-world examples of how I've put it to work here in my own garden. When people talk about columnar plants in small gardens, the first thing they think about is privacy. And yes, they can do that, but that's not the only thing they can do. The point is that small footprint and that big vertical lift that it gives you. What you do with that lift depends on where you put it. It can give you privacy, sure, but it can also mark a threshold, signal that you're moving through one part of the garden to another. It can be a pivot, it can be an anchor. It's just a very useful tool in a small garden because it doesn't cost you much in terms of the ground that it occupies to do what it is that you're asking it to do. So let me show you how that's playing out here in a couple of different ways in a couple of different areas in my garden. This tall, narrow, variegated tree-like shrub is marking a threshold into this front seating area. That's Eucryphia lucida spring cream, and it lets you know that this area is different. It's signaling that I've entered a different place. In the back garden, Taxus beanpole serves a similar purpose. On the one side, I have the beanpole. And on the other side is a tall structure with some vines growing on it. And together, they create a threshold that leads into this intimate seating area. They're not a hedge, but they announce and separate this seating area from the rest of the garden. This is a Japanese plum yew, Cephalotaxus harringtonia Fastigiata. It occupies the northwest corner of my front garden, and it's a very useful plant for this kind of work. It's strictly upright, evergreen, shade tolerant, drought tolerant, and it's been relatively narrow over a long period of time. Doesn't ask for much, and it doesn't misbehave. This, however, is a pretty old specimen, and it is widening out a bit, but I'm intending to make some corrective cuts on it soon to make it read as more upright. Just one of the garden chores I haven't gotten to yet, but it'll be easy enough to correct. Doing it earlier would have been better, but alas, it's a bit of a do as I say, not as I do moment. Repetition is another thing that narrow, upright plants do particularly well in a small garden. When you place them strategically, not just one, but 2 or 3 at different points in your garden, your eye follows. Boom, boom, boom. And where the eye goes, the body follows. It's a method I've used many times in client gardens and at different points here in my own. For years, I had 2 upright taxus in this garden, positioned at different points rather than side by side. They weren't a hedge, and they weren't a matched pair. They were placed to draw the eye through the space and create a rhythm. And it worked with those taxus, and the principle works with other plants too. What I'm talking about now is doing this with a strongly upright plant. The same idea can be applied with other plant forms, for example, repeating a rounded form. The repetition is what creates movement, and movement creates a sense of space. What makes this especially useful in a small garden is the math. A narrow columnar plant takes almost no ground. So repeating it 2 or 3 times costs you almost nothing in terms of footprint, and it pays you back in cohesion and flow. In my garden design practice, I did a lot of small garden designs. So I've always been on the lookout for plants with a narrow columnar footprint. It's a perennial issue, this idea of doing more with less in terms of the space that you have to work with. When I'm choosing what to plant in my own garden here, sometimes it's based on my experience with these plants in other gardens, client gardens, or gardens that I've visited. I'm always looking at plants, always watching how people use them and how they behave in real life garden situations. And that's how a lot of these plants ended up here. Oftentimes, trying them here is what gave me the information and the confidence to use them in client gardens. Several years ago, we lost an Azara microphylla right here. And when that came out, we lost something very important. It was what was providing division between us and our neighbors to the north. When the Azara was here, it and the loquat were more or less like peers. The Azara with its finely textured foliage, the loquat with its chunky, large foliage, they were comparable in height and breadth. Now that the loquat is so much larger and really doing well, the resulting space is different. We needed to emphasize the narrowness of it, but we still wanted a fine texture to complement the big, chunky, loquat foliage. This umbrella pine, Joe Cozey, was a very good solution. We saw Joe Cozey in Renee's garden. Renee's garden is similar to mine in that it is plant-packed with very small outdoor spaces, and it leans heavily on small footprint columnar plants to define her space. We toured her garden on this channel, and you'll see examples of some of these methods in that video. That firsthand experience with that plant, the Joe Cozey, growing in a very similar situation is part of what gave me confidence to put it here. Tsuga Thorsen's weeping is malleable. It can take a variety of forms. It can be low and mounding and kind of spreading. I've chosen to train mine to be strictly upright, and it's taken to that like a champ. I'll probably ask it for another foot of height, see if I can coax it a little further up. Left to its own devices, it can go in a very different direction. The placement of this Ilex crenata Mariesii, now a very mature specimen, isn't ideal, to be honest with you, but it has become such a specimen, and it is too big to move and it's too precious to remove, so I'm adapting to it. One thing I've done is allow a vine to start climbing in it. And now that it's so large and so structured and so sturdy, a vine isn't going to overwhelm it. And it's created a really sweet effect, a seasonal dimension, a kind of a floral high note. As it's gotten bigger, it's also starting to act less like a punctuation point and more like a threshold. And so far, that's still working. But there's some competition building between it and another focal point, a container in the pathway that is columnar and upright with a foliage specimen in it. They're working together now, but there may come a time when something has to move. Luckily, what I'd move is that container. That flexibility using containers as mobile, movable accents that can adapt as the garden changes and plants mature around them is something I find increasingly useful. It's a thread I'll pick up in another video in this series. When plants are described as dwarf, conifers in particular, it doesn't mean they stop growing. It really just means that they grow slowly. And slow growing is not the same as staying small forever. For many years, I had an upright taxus in this garden. More than one, actually, positioned at different points to create that rhythm and repetition that I mentioned earlier. Early photos of this garden show them as petite, strictly upright, strong, doing exactly what I put them there to do. But over the years, they got bigger and taller and blobbier, and they weren't sentinels anymore. They were just large taxus. I took one out, then eventually the other, and once I finally made that decision and followed through on it, I asked myself what I always ask in those situations, and that is, what took me so long? Compare that to Texas beanpole in the back garden. Beanpole was a later introduction, and it was fairly new and uncommon at the time. And it has reliably maintained its strictly upright form ever since. It's grown, yes, but it's never lost that narrow habit. Not all upright forms are created equal, and beanpole has delivered on that promise in a way that those earlier varieties did not. This front southwest corner is now occupied by a different conifer, not a columnar plant, so it doesn't quite belong in this discussion, except to say things evolve, things change. That corner has always needed a pivot point. For years, a columnar upright plants were doing that job. Now, something else is filling that same role, but with a more irregular form. And as it gets bigger, it's becoming less effective. And it's a candidate for evaluation and possible removal. The beat goes on. Not every plant that starts to spread needs to go. Chamaecyparis Somerset in the parking strip was starting to get a little fat, too wide, and I was getting impatient with it. I was concerned that it was going to lose its narrow habit for good. But it has too much going for it for me to remove it. It's exceptional drought tolerance, wonderful coloring, and it's a central part of a plant combination I really like. So instead of taking it out, I made some bold corrective pruning moves, and I'm pretty happy with the results. I can do more if needed, and I will do so more regularly from here forward so I can stay on top of it and keep it in that spot for the long term. So sometimes the answer is just getting in there, trying something, and being open to it not working. The worst case scenario is that you remove it, and it was headed that way anyway if it kept getting fat and kept outgrowing its space. It wasn't going to be there for the long term. So I wasn't throwing caution to the wind. I was taking a risk, and that risk felt right. Rhamnus fine line is kind of frothy, little grass-like leaves, and definitely irregular in shape. And honestly, I'm still kind of figuring out. I like it, but I don't really have a sense yet of how I'm going to work with it long term. It's getting a little heavier on the top than on the bottom, developing a kind of an odd shape. And if I were starting from scratch, I'd probably control its height and spread earlier. And I may still intervene on this one. There's a lot of focus right now on developing plants specifically for small gardens. Proven Winners, for example, has been pushing columnar hibiscus hard, and I'm growing purple pillar. Not yet in flower, but here it is in my garden, and I'm growing it in several client gardens, and I've been watching it for a while now. So far, in my garden, it's holding a relatively narrow habit, but I have a feeling it's going to be wider than advertised as it matures. Partly because I've been watching one in the neighborhood that I'm pretty sure isn't getting early corrective shaping. And it's already getting a bit chubby and wide. And knowing that, I'm going to be especially diligent about guiding mine towards staying on the narrow side. Left untended when young, you can find yourself down a path that's harder to recover from. And I'm a big believer in pruning early and often. That's the approach I use for a lot of my pruning, particularly when I'm trying to achieve a particular shape. And I do this with my dwarf conifers as well. If columnar plants are one answer to the small footprint, big lift equation, vines are another. A clematis on a support occupies almost no ground at all, just straight up. I invested in more vine supports this year. I'm growing more clematis than I had structures for, and they need somewhere to go. So some of these supports are actually in containers, which doubles down on that small footprint idea. The vine is already in a container, and the support just takes it straight on up. So that ground footprint is essentially zero. And even when the vines are dormant, the supports add a sense of list, sense of structure, and an art element. They're doing something year-round. I have one in my front entry growing into a support, one that is, and one that isn't. The one in the support has become a better version of itself, and the one still tumbling out of a container has nowhere to go. Vines can take a bit of wrangling, but the return on investment in terms of vertical presence is hard to beat. In an earlier video, we talked about creating space by manipulating your canopy. using limbed up shrubs to do that. And this is another way to sculpt and create space. Gardens are three-dimensional, and where and how we place plants are what create the spaces for people within the garden that feel good, that feel right, that feel comfortable. Sculpting with plants, adapting, evolving, and changing over time to create living, breathing, beautiful outdoor spaces made of floors and ceilings and walls. In a coming video, we'll talk about walls and floors. So this is just one of the building blocks for creating an inviting outdoor retreat. In this video, I've shown you a handful of plants, but there are many, many plants that can do the kind of work that we've been talking about in a small garden. What I'm really trying to do is to share some of the thinking behind these choices. What are those vertical elements going to do for you from a design standpoint? And once you start asking the right questions, the specific plant becomes kind of secondary. Matter of fact, you're probably going to find more than one plant that can do the job that you're looking to have it do. It's the answer to your questions, and it's something that you can research. eGardenGo is a really good place to start. It's full of plant profiles and combination ideas, and it allows you to filter by a plant's growth habit and form, as well as other cultural attributes. It's going to help you find the right plant for your particular situation. In a small garden, you think a lot about ground. You think a lot about what fits, what takes up too much space. Vertical space, that's real estate too. And that's not a new idea, but a columnar plant, a trained vine, a weeping plant directed upwards. Those are all types of applications of vertical plantings that I've tried to share with you today. Those ideas come from my garden. They're methods that I've used for growing up when you can't grow out. They change what's possible, even in a small lot like mine, 50 by 100 feet.